Wouldn't you like to taste the coffee I prepared specifically for you, darling? My spouse James inquired with a peculiar smile that failed to extend to his eyes. I was seated at my sister-in-law Nina's refined dining surface in her Nashville residence, where we assembled for our monthly family gathering. The coffee vessel before me possessed a bizarre, nearly metallic odor that caused my stomach to revolt. My name is Christina, and at 29, I never anticipated I'd be questioning whether my own spouse was attempting to poison me. However, following 3 years of matrimony and numerous instances of accidental food contamination, I had discovered to remain vigilant, particularly around Nina. She possessed a method of arranging circumstances that resulted in my illness or embarrassment, consistently with that identical innocent expression James was displaying now. "How considerate of you," I answered, manufacturing a smile while my thoughts raced. The scent drifting from the vessel was dissimilar to any coffee I'd encountered previously. It recalled the occasion last month when I'd concluded an emergency treatment after consuming tea at Nina's residence. The physicians couldn't clarify my symptoms, and Nina had maintained she'd prepared the tea precisely the identical manner she prepared her own. Nina observed me carefully from across the surface, absently mixing her own untouched coffee. "James has transformed into quite the coffee specialist lately," she mentioned with a sneer. "He's been rehearsing various preparation techniques exclusively for you." The manner she stressed "for you" transmitted shivers along my spine. I had recognized James investing more duration at Nina's residence lately, professing they were arranging a surprise for our approaching anniversary. However, something sensed incorrect. The whispered discussions that terminated when I entered the space, the unusual messages I'd glimpsed on his device, and now this coffee with its peculiar scent. I elevated the vessel, pretending to consume a portion while examining their expressions. James and Nina traded a rapid look that verified my suspicions. Creating a display of examining my device, I stood up suddenly. "Oh, would you observe that? I require to execute a rapid contact for employment. Nina, would you object if I utilized your workspace?" As I proceeded past Nina's arrangement, I intentionally faltered, rapidly exchanging our coffee vessels in the disorder of balancing myself. "I'm extremely apologetic," I declared, straightening upward. "I'm such a clumsy person occasionally." Nina dismissed my apology with a constrained smile. "Simply attempt not to damage anything in the workspace." I acknowledged and hurried away, my heart racing. Through the workspace's entrance, I could still observe them at the surface. Now I simply had to wait and observe. From the workspace entrance, I observed Nina elevate the coffee vessel to her lips, and my stomach tightened with apprehension. Portion of me desired to halt her, to caution her, but I required to understand the truth. I'd invested too many nights in emergency facilities, too many hours doubled over in agony, consistently after sharing meals with them. It wasn't consistently like this. When I initially encountered James at a friend's matrimony in Nashville 3 years prior, he was captivating and considerate. Nina had appeared welcoming too, inviting me to family assemblies and proposing to assist arrange our matrimony. However, looking rearward, I should have recognized the warning signs. The manner she would accidentally distribute things on my garment at significant events, or how my food consistently appeared to possess extra flavoring when she assisted cooking. The incidents initiated small, undisturbed stomach here, a moderate allergic response there. James consistently had a justification prepared. "Perhaps it was something you consumed earlier, or you must be developing something." However, the pattern was becoming apparent. The worst was 2 months prior, when I concluded hospitalized after consuming breakfast at their residence. The physicians discovered traces of something in my system they couldn't recognize. But James persuaded everyone I must have consumed some expired medication. I gripped the entrance frame, observing as Nina consumed another portion of the coffee. James was typing on his device, seemingly unconcerned. My own untouched vessel sat cold on the surface where I'd positioned it. The metallic odor still remained in my nose, causing me to shudder. A slight tremor in Nina's hand captured my attention. She positioned down the vessel, her face suddenly pale. "James," she stated, her voice trembling, "something's incorrect." James looked upward, his expression transforming from confusion to horror as he comprehended which vessel she was consuming from. He leaped upward, overturning his chair. "Nina, what's occurring?" Nina's hands were trembling violently now. "I don't." I sensed she attempted to stand but faltered, grasping the edge of the surface for support. "James, what did you place in that coffee?" I stepped out of the workspace, my device already recording. James was beside Nina now, his face ashen. "That wasn't intended to be your vessel," he whispered. However, in the silence of the dining space, his words transmitted clearly. Nina's eyes expanded with realization and terror. "Contact an ambulance," she gasped, sliding to the floor. "Please, I can't." I dialed emergency services immediately, my hands steady despite the chaos developing before me. Nina was on the floor now, her body affected with violent tremors. James knelt beside her, panic inscribed across his face as he comprehended their scheme had reversed spectacularly. "Emergency services?" "Yes, we require an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive," I stated clearly, maintaining my device recording with my other hand. "My sister-in-law appears to be experiencing a severe response to something in her coffee. She's conscious but experiencing tremors." As I communicated to the dispatcher, Nina's eyes secured onto mine. The usual cold calculation in her gaze was replaced by raw terror. "Christina," she gasped, "you exchanged. You understood?" "Ma'am, the ambulance is approaching," the dispatcher assured me. "Please, remain on the connection." James was growing more frantic by the moment. "Nina, what's occurring? That wasn't intended to— it wasn't designed for—" "Silence, James," Nina snapped through clenched teeth, her anger momentarily conquering her distress. "This is entirely your fault. You stated it would simply make her ill enough to miss the board assembly next week. You promised it wouldn't be traced." My blood ran cold. The board assembly, where I was scheduled to display my proposal for a significant client account. The identical account Nina had been attempting to secure for months at our competing organizations. Everything initiated clicking into position. "The tea last month," I stated, my voice surprisingly steady. "And the breakfast incident 2 months prior. Those weren't accidents, were they?" Nina's face contorted with another wave of agony. "The tea. That was intended to maintain you home during the Johnson contract display. However, you proceeded anyway." She clutched her stomach, doubling over. He stated, "We simply required to discredit you, make clients perceive you were unreliable." The sound of sirens occupied the air outside. James stood upward, retreating away from both of us. "Nina, cease talking. You don't understand what you're stating." "I understand precisely what I'm stating," Nina expelled, her words slurring slightly. "We've been arranging this for months. Ever since Christina initiated outperforming me at every client assembly. You were intended to ensure she consumed it today." The paramedics burst through the front entrance, and I rapidly stepped aside to permit them work. As they loaded Nina onto a stretcher, I ceased recording and transmitted the video to my private email, then to my legal representative. James stood frozen, observing as his carefully constructed scheme crumbled around him. "I'll accompany her to the hospital," I informed the paramedics, my voice firm. After all, I require to ensure my sister-in-law receives the appropriate treatment. I encountered James's terrified gaze, and I'm confident the physicians will be extremely interested in understanding precisely what was in that coffee. The emergency facility at Nashville General Hospital was a flurry of activity as physicians rushed to treat Nina. I sat in the waiting space, my device clutched in my hand, replaying the recording of Nina's confession. The tremors in her voice, the panic in her eyes. It was all the evidence I required to prove this wasn't simply paranoia on my portion. "Family of Nina Anderson?" a nurse announced. I stood upward, noting James's conspicuous absence. He'd mumbled something about parking the vehicle 20 minutes prior and hadn't returned. "I'm her sister-in-law," I stated, following the nurse through the double entrances. "How is she?" "She stabilized, but we discovered concerning levels of toxins in her system." The nurse's expression was grave. "The physician would like to communicate with you about some unusual discoveries in her blood examination." Dr. Phillips, a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, was waiting by Nina's chamber. "Mrs. Bennett, could you inform me precisely what occurred before your sister-in-law became ill?" I consumed a deep breath, retrieving my device. "I perceive you should listen to this initially." I played the recording from brunch, observing the physician's expression transform from professional concern to alarm. "This is extremely serious," she stated, creating notes on her tablet. "The substance we discovered isn't something that accidentally concludes in coffee. We're examining deliberate contamination." At that moment, James appeared at the conclusion of the corridor, his face pale and perspiring. He'd clearly overheard the physician's words. "Christina," he initiated, taking a step toward me. "Permit me explain." "Remain back," Dr. Phillips cautioned, pressing the nurse's contact button. "Security to chamber 412, please." James elevated his hands in surrender. "This is all a misunderstanding." Nina was confused. She didn't understand what she was stating. "Really?" I retrieved the message I'd discovered on his device last week, the ones I'd secretly forwarded to myself. "So these communications between you and Nina about ensuring she's out of commission before the Henderson display were simply friendly discussion." His face drained of color. "You examined through my device? After I discovered the unusual pills in your desk compartment?" "Yes, I did." I turned to Dr. Phillips. "Doctor, I've been hospitalized 3 occasions in the past 6 months with unexplained symptoms. I'd like to understand if they match what you discovered in Nina's system today." The physician's eyes narrowed. "We'll require to execute some examinations to compare. Security will ensure your spouse remains available for questioning." 2 security guards appeared, positioning themselves on either side of James. He looked trapped, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. "Nina and I," he stammered, "we were simply attempting to assist you slow down. You were working too intensely, taking all the significant clients. Nina stated if we could simply make you take some duration off." "By poisoning me?" My voice was steady, even as my hands trembled with rage. "How extended have you been executing this? Was it you who tampered with my food at the Christmas celebration too?" James's silence was all the answer I required. Behind him, I could observe Nina's chamber, where she lay connected to various monitors. Her earlier bravado was departed, replaced by the terror of someone who understood their schemes had finally captured up with them. Detective Mendoza is approaching, Dr. Phillips stated quietly. She'll desire to obtain statements from everyone involved, I acknowledged, experiencing a strange sense of calm. The truth was finally emerging, and there was no returning. Detective Mendoza arrived within the hour, her presence commanding attention in the sterile hospital corridor. She was a seasoned investigator who specialized in domestic abuse cases, and she listened intently as I played the recording from brunch and displayed her the message communications. Mrs. Bennett, she stated, reviewing her notes. You mentioned previous hospitalizations. Can you inform me more about those incidents? I retrieved my device again, opening a document I'd been quietly maintaining for months. The initial occasion was in February, after a dinner at Nina's residence. I had severe stomach agonies and dizziness. The second was in April, the tea incident, and then in June after breakfast with them. My voice remained steady as I continued. Each occasion, the symptoms were similar, but sufficiently different that the physicians couldn't pinpoint a cause. The detective's eyes narrowed as she examined my detailed log of dates, symptoms, and circumstances. And you've been maintaining records? Ever since I recognized the pattern. I hesitated before retrieving another device from my purse. I also initiated carrying a backup device with a different number. I utilized it to record discussions when I was around them. I possess several where Nina and James addressed their schemes, though they're cautious not to be explicit. In one of the recordings, Nina's voice transmitted through clearly. The Henderson account is worth millions, James. We can't permit her ruin everything we've worked for. Simply adhere to the scheme. A few days of illness should be sufficient. James's response was equally damaging. I've obtained something stronger this occasion. She won't make it to the display. Detective Mendoza's expression hardened as she listened. Through the window of Mina's chamber, I could observe my sister-in-law was now awake, looking significantly less confident than she had at brunch. The hospital is executing toxicology screens, the detective informed me. Dr. Phillips has already identified several substances that don't occur naturally. We'll require samples from your residence as well. A commotion down the corridor captured our attention. James was arguing with the security guards, his voice rising in desperation. I require to communicate with my spouse, he shouted. Christina, please, you don't comprehend we were attempting to protect you. Detective Mendoza stepped between us. Mr. Bennett, you're not assisting your case. We've already discovered evidence of premeditated. Premeditated? James laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the corridor. We were simply attempting to slow her down. She was working herself to death, taking all the major accounts. Nina stated if we could simply make her take some duration off. By poisoning her, Detective Mendoza's voice was sharp. That's not protection, Mr. Bennett. That's attempted murder. The color drained from James's face. Murder? No, that's not. We never intended to. Then what precisely did you intend to execute? I inquired, my voice surprisingly calm. When you placed something in my coffee this morning, what was intended to occur? James's silence communicated volumes. Behind him, I could observe Mina observing through her hospital chamber window. Her face, a mask of terror and calculation. I wondered if she was attempting to determine how to spin this, how to clarify away months of systematic poisoning as some sort of misguided attempt at assisting me. We'll require both of their devices, Detective Mendoza informed the security guards. And I desire officers positioned at both entrances. Nobody departs until we obtain the toxicology results. Dr. Phillips entered Nina's chamber with a tablet in hand, her expression grim as she reviewed the examination results. Detective Mendoza and I followed, while James remained outside with the guards. Nina attempted to sit upward, straighter in her hospital bed, but the tremors hadn't completely subsided. The toxicology report displays elevated levels of several substances, Dr. Phillips announced, her voice clinical. Most concerning is the presence of a particular compound that's typically utilized in pharmaceutical examination. It's not something the general public should possess access to. Nina's face paled. That's impossible. James stated it was simply something to cause mild symptoms. Mild symptoms? Detective Mendoza interrupted, extracting her notebook. Like the ones your sister-in-law experienced over the past 6 months. The entrance opened and another detective entered, retaining an evidence container. We discovered these in Mr. Bennett's office desk at the Anderson Marketing Organization. He reported, presenting several small bottles with clinical labels, along with detailed notes about dosages and responses. I sensed my knees weakened as I comprehended the full scope of their scheme. You were documenting everything? Like some kind of experiment? It wasn't like that, Nina protested, but her voice wavered. He simply required to track what functioned. The initial few attempts weren't effective enough. You kept appearing to assemblies anyway. So you elevated the dosages. Detective Mendoza concluded, examining the bottles. Did you understand these substances could be lethal in higher concentrations? The chamber fell silent. James, still visible through the window, sank into a chair in the corridor, his head in his hands. The Henderson account, I stated slowly, pieces clicking into position. It wasn't simply about that display, was it? You required me out of the manor permanently because the client specifically requested me as their lead. Nina's face contorted with a mixture of anger and terror. You were ruining everything. I constructed that client portfolio for years, and then you appear and suddenly everyone desires to work with you instead. James stated he could fix it. By killing me? The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. We weren't attempting to, Nina initiated, but Dr. Phillips cut her off. The concentration in the coffee you consumed today, the physician stated, looking directly at Nina, was significantly higher than previous samples we've analyzed from Mrs. Bennett's earlier hospital visits. If she had consumed it, the outcome would have been severe, possibly fatal. Detective Mendoza turned to the other officer. Will require a full warrant for both their residences and offices, and contact the pharmaceutical organization listed on these bottles. Discover how they obtained these substances. Mina slumped back against her pillows, the fight draining from her face. It wasn't intended to proceed this far, she whispered. James kept stating we simply required one more attempt. I stepped closer to her bed, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. Every occasion I got ill, every assembly I missed, every client I lost, you were both there, observing, taking notes on how your poison was affecting me. What kind of individuals does that make you? The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, I could hear James being read his privileges as additional officers arrived. Nina stared at her hands, unable to encounter my gaze. Detective, I stated, turning away from my sister-in-law. I'm prepared to make my formal statement now. The trial lasted 3 weeks, but it sensed like years. I sat in the courtroom each day, observing as the prosecution methodically laid out their case against James and Nina. The evidence was overwhelming. The bottles from James's office, their detailed notes on each poisoning attempt, the recorded discussions, and message communications addressing their schemes. What struck me most was their demeanor throughout the proceedings. Nina, usually so polished and confident, looked small in her defendant's chair. James couldn't even observe at me, maintaining his eyes fixed on the floor as expert witnesses detailed the potentially lethal effects of the substances they'd been utilizing. Dr. Phillips's testimony was particularly damaging. She presented a comprehensive analysis, displaying how they had gradually elevated the dosages over duration, demonstrating clear intent to cause serious harm. The pharmaceutical organization representative verified that James had stolen the compounds through his college friend who worked in their research department. The defendants displayed a calculated pattern of behavior, the prosecutor argued in her closing statement. This wasn't simply corporate sabotage. It was a systematic attempt to harm Mrs. Bennett, with a clear escalation that could have resulted in death. When the verdict was finally read, I sensed no joy, only relief. Both James and Nina were discovered guilty on multiple counts, including attempted murder and conspiracy. The judge's words echoed through the silent courtroom. The premeditated nature of these actions, carried out against a family member over an extended period, demands the maximum sentence. I observed as they were led away in handcuffs, thinking about how greed and jealousy had twisted two individuals I once trusted into something unrecognizable. Their business, their reputations, their freedom, all sacrificed in an attempt to destroy me. 1 year after the trial, I stood at the podium of the Nashville Business Leaders Conference, preparing to deliver the keynote speech. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was precisely the kind of opportunity Nina had attempted to prevent me from achieving. The Henderson account, which she and James had been so desperate to steal, had led to several more major clients, establishing me as one of the top marketing executives in the region. Success isn't simply about talent or hard work, I began, looking out at the sea of faces. It's about integrity, about constructing genuine relationships based on trust. I paused, permitting my words sink in. Sometimes the biggest threats to our success originate from those closest to us. But surviving those challenges makes us stronger. After my speech, several young professionals approached me seeking advice. One woman, her eyes bright with determination, inquired how I'd maintained my composure throughout the ordeal. I focused on what I could control, I informed her. I gathered evidence, trusted my instincts, and refused to permit terror stop me from pursuing my goals. Later that evening, I received an email from the Henderson client, confirming they were renewing their contract for another 3 years. I smiled, thinking about how differently things might have concluded if I hadn't trusted my instincts that day at brunch. The local paper had executed a small article that morning about Nina and James beginning their prison sentences. I didn't read it. Instead, I focused on the proposal for my newest client project, understanding that the best revenge wasn't about obtaining even. It was about moving forward and succeeding despite those who attempted to hold you back.